Sure. Hey everyone, welcome to the session. I'll be talking about sports this time. So we're going to structure this a little differently from other sessions. What I'm going to do is first talk about all the common stakeholders that exist within the realm of sports debates, because one of the biggest mistakes that people do is failing to impact properly in sports motions. But this comes from two issues. One, not identifying the correct stakeholders within a debate. But two, even if you identify the correct stakeholders, you're not sure what scale of impact is happening on these people and why it's so relevant. To that extent, sports motions tend to become soft motions in which impacting becomes pretty minimal. It's not usually the case, and I think a better understanding of all stakeholders is the most important thing. Post that, we look at two motions, discuss these motions, what are the clashes, and how you can go ahead and argue it from both sides. Cool. But before we begin, few ground rules. One, always take notes. If you're just passively listening, you're not going to be able to learn anything. Two, always ask questions. The entire point of these workshops is to keep it interactive and answer specific doubts that you have pertaining to these topics. So if you don't ask your specific doubts, you'll never be able to improve. Three, always fill feedback. I'll submit a feedback form at the end of the session. Please do fill it out. Four, there always a limit to stock. This isn't meant to be the end all of be all of argumentation, which is to say, once you have watched this workshop, it's not like you know everything, or you just have to regurgitate whatever I've said in future debates. That's not going to win you the debate. You still have to iterate on this. You still have to apply it to every single debate, and you'll have to improve the quality of these arguments. With that, let's begin. Yeah. I also want to quickly flag a couple of things are out of syllabus for this one. One is how sports relates to social justice. So you will find quite a few motions related to that. You would have popularly seen the Kaepernick motions in which someone took a bow during the national anthem in US. All of these are related to social justice movements. These ones are not applicable within the scope of this workshop. Same thing for international relations. Sports is often used as a tool for foreign policy. However, I will not be focusing on that. If you want to go ahead and understand these two topics and their interplay with each other better, you please watch the video by Manchester Debating Union or MDU. They have an excellent YouTube workshop on this already. So just Google Manchester Debating Union Sports and you'll be able to find an excellent workshop on that. This workshop is just for understanding sports motions and how to break down the sports motion in the first place. Cool. Who are the stakeholders of a sports debate? Does anyone want to guess? Players, sure. Who else? Countries, okay. By my count, there were 10 stakeholders, so you'll have to think a lot more. Teams, fans, you can even unmute and speak, whatever's more comfortable. Anyone else? There are a lot more. Sponsors, sure. So if you look at this, by my count, there are fans, players, owners, the economy, teams, the sport itself, the general public, and a few more stakeholders like sponsors and more. I'll come to them later. So, sports is a massive ecosystem in of itself. It's very difficult then to go ahead and one identify which stakeholder this debate is about and how these stakeholders are being affected. These are the two questions I raised early on as well. So whenever you're thinking of motions or thinking of the stakeholders, these are the things I want you to focus on. You need to be actively remembering all of these stakeholders because all of them play very crucial parts in the ecosystem, which defines how a specific motion would interact with these stakeholders and how therefore the debate changes. Cool. Let's go over them one by one, right? And let's start by fans. So the first question is, what are the type of fans? Are all fans of Monolith? Are they different? Does anyone want to answer this?
Like there are so many kinds of friends. One who just watch it for, let's say, entertainment purposes.
Hmm.
Second is hardcore sports fan who probably watch it for aesthetics of the game. Like there can be sub branches when you talk about fans, right? The impact on let's say each category is going to be different in this particular notion. Cult fans, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the reason I'm going to go ahead and talk about this is it's very important in debates to differentiate between the multiple types of fans there are, and you cannot think of fans in a singular manner. There are casual watchers who watch just because they enjoy the sport and probably don't support a team, or even if they support the team, they just watch a few games here and there whenever they're bored. There are hardcore fans who could buy all the merchandise, show up to every sport, like show up to every single match, and are like dedicating their identity around specific teams. So these fans exist on a spectrum, and it's important to go ahead and differentiate it. The reason for this is there will often be motions in which you will have to prioritize one level of fans over the other. So if you're trying to prioritize the casual fans, you would try to argue why they're much more in quantity than hardcore fans, because not everyone has the time to go ahead and show why, like, go ahead and spend hours and hours or hundreds and thousands of dollars on seat tickets, merchandise, etc., etc. If you're trying to talk about the small hardcore fans and why they're important in a debate, you'd want to talk about why the quality of these fans is important, because they bring in the most revenue per person for these clubs, and they're very important because these are the people who you want to satisfy, because they are the one who are likely to call you out if you do something wrong or hold strong opinions about the team. So therefore, you want to go ahead and differentiate them whenever you're trying to understand emotion. That's idea number one here. But also, why do fans care about sports? Like, what is the point of sports? And this is really important in order to understand any impact about sports, right? Fundamentally, why do people enjoy sports? What do you think?
I think entertainment first thing,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you are living in this capitalistic world, hectic lives. So this gives you that sort of space that you can move out of that. You can probably rejoice yourself outside of that time that you're working, right? This is the first reason. Second is probably people do it for health purposes, just to be there. Third reason could be passion, or probably the fact that they have been playing that sport, or they like watching it because they are enthusiastic about it. It's not just purely no patriotism. I don't think is the main reason. Yeah, it could be, but yeah, I think these are.
And one of the reason can also be betting. Like if you watch sports and then you are thinking one of the sides might win, and you would also bet and win the game the other end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. There are a few reasons. One is enjoyment. Enjoyment comes in twofold ideas. One is entertainment, something we talked about. So, for example, one of the things is sports is almost, at least used to be, the most readily accessible form of entertainment, which was to say before Netflix and Amazon Prime existed back in the old days. Sports was the most common form of entertainment because it was much more readily accessible than a lot more forms of entertainment now. Gaming used to be really expensive, Netflix and all used to be. So for a lot of people, this was a single source of enjoyment that you could, watch without spending too much money. This leaks into the idea that even still, sports is a largely accessible form of entertainment to all kinds of people. That's number one. Number two, give me a second. Second, it's a healthy expression of emotions, which is to say, the kind of passion you feel towards your own team. You've seen people like screaming, you've seen people having the time of their lives. This is a healthy outlet for their emotions, which is to say that instead of directing this energy somewhere else, they're able to channel it in a much more positive manner when they go ahead and have sports, which means these feelings that you have, that you want to go ahead and achieve something, or like high levels of determination, these can be channeled through sports. When you see other teams win, when you see your favorite team perform really well, that level of pleasure you feel is something that's really important to you, and is available in other places in a very limited manner. That's number one. Number two, is the idea that this reinforces your identity. The only time I feel highly nationalistic is when I'm watching India play the World Cup. So it's really important for people because it helps you bond over like your shared identity with other people. I talk more about this in how sports helps build community. But secondly, it reinforces your own identity. It makes you feel proud of the team you are supporting. When they win, you are proud that you belong to the group of people who are on the winning side. So it really helps you believe in something, and that belief is something that because you watch them again, you watch them like go through hardships together or watch them be successful together. Just that continued belief in each other is something that's really valuable to individuals. But lastly, sports helps build community. This exists in multiple ways. This can be online communities. So you see people become easier friends when they support the same football club, for example, where it's easy for you to go ahead and talk to people because of your shared interests. But also, secondly, in terms of like local communities, which is to say, you will see this often in like small towns in England who have a football club. Go ahead and like band together because of their identity that they share because of the football club. So because everyone recognizes that football club, everyone will go every Sunday to go ahead and watch their matches. It's easier for you to make friends because you now have the shared values, you have that shared identity with one another. So it's easier to trust the other person. All of this means sports is not only good for self entertainment, it also helps build community to the extent all of you support the same team, all of you go watch the match together every single weekend, and this like reiterates your interactions with each other and therefore makes you feel much better. Any questions till now? Sure. So the point is, whenever you're talking about fans, you necessarily need to talk about why they're into sports in the first place. And when you impact this, you have to explain whether the changes you're making are helping one of these like features get better or worse. For example, if it builds better community, then this change that you have in this debate is probably very positive because it helps fans enjoy the sport more, but it also helps them build community. And this utility that they achieve is not present in any other scenario. So these are the ways you can explain why it's important to improve the sport and why you should be spending money on sport in the first place. It's not just about, oh, it's fun. It's more about how the kind of feelings and utility it provides to the people who watch it and why that is so important, similar to art. Cool. Let's talk about owners. So first thing, owners can be good or bad. It really depends. We'll talk more about this in depth. A lot of people fall into the trap of, oh, owners are bad people. But I think it's a lot more deeper than that. And we'll discuss this one by one. So the first question is, what do owners want? Why do you go ahead and purchase a team?
What do owners want, right?
Yes.
Owners want sponsors of traction because traction drives sponsors, right? Results out of the team because I think for you to have traction, you need results out of your franchisee. For
But
that,
why do you want sponsors?
want sponsors for, let's say you have invested money, right, in terms of recruiting players or probably bidding on them, but besides that you are also paying fees to the tournament that you're participating. It's, let's say if this is some sort of franchisee tournament, you pay hefty amount to probably be a team in that. You bought this team, you probably paid a lot of money for that as well. You want your returns that you have invested, so that is one of the reasons.
Excellent. But much more simply, you just want money. Like you want to turn in a profit. So, yes, money is one thing they want. What else do people want?
Performances, I mean, you do want that.
Sure. But why do you want them to perform well?
uh, we want them to perform well. I think TRP related stuff, and you want good sponsors, right? Ultimately,
What did you say before sponsors?
uh, TRP or probably the
Okay.
eyeballs that your team gets is directly proportional to your performance.
Yes. Okay. So let me ask you this question. Recently in football, we've seen a particular entity buy a lot of clubs recently across multiple leagues. Who is this person or who is this stakeholder?
I don't remember exactly.
But someone has been investing a lot of money into sports recently. Do you know who this is, Srinivas?
Is it probably the Qatari Sports Fund or like the Saudi
Yeah.
like Kingdom Crown?
Exactly. Saudi and Qatar has been posting in a lot of money, especially this comes to the royal family, who are already incredibly rich. So the question is, they probably don't want money. They have plenty of it. Why are they going ahead and doing this?
Like probably like just having more political bargain and like having more like political stances, like using sports as the instrument to do that.
Sure. Okay. But to the general public, why? Do you
Like, can
guys
you
know?
repeat the question?
No. Do you guys know of the term whitewashing?
I think having a team that performs well does give you this sort of social capital, right? That's one of the thing. Soft power. Plus, you get visibility, right? I mean, that is important for them. Sure, you do have money, but you still need marketing, right? Why does Nita Ambani care about buying Mumbai Indians, right? I mean, that's in a way marketing.
Excellent. Yeah. So over here, it again, the Saudi Investment Group does not need marketing. They are not marketing themselves, but essentially, you're on the right track. Where if you are an owner of a club and you show that you're dedicated towards the club, it associates your image with the club, which is a net positive because people are fans of a club and their people tend to like the club. The reason a lot of Saudi and Qatari groups have been buying is because generally the perception of the Middle East is incredibly negative in the world stage. The point at which now they go ahead and buy, like for example, they bought Newcastle, they invested a lot into PSG. The point at which they're spending a lot of money on these things, their name is more likely to be associated with these clubs as opposed to the negative PR. So they are basically whitewashing their PR by changing the conversation around them from going to, oh, these people are doing XYZ bad things, to, oh, these people are the owners of these clubs and these I'm a fan of that club. So you change your image and perception by spending money into like clubs and becoming an owner. The last thing is simply local community. Not everyone owns a massive club. Again, when you're thinking of sports, don't just think of the best teams in the world. Sports is played across multiple tiers, which is to say the English Football League has like 8 or 9 tiers to it. The Premier League is the first one, but there are like 6, 7 leagues under it in which you can get promoted to the Premier League. And these are very important, right? Because these people are not like crazy rich billionaires who are owning a club. They're probably people or a collective who care about the community and want to build and foster that community. So you become a club owner not only to maybe generate a profit or whitewash your image. It's because you care about that particular town or particular area and you want to see it flourish and you want to see the it culturally flourish, which is why you buy the football team and try to go ahead and improve that. Any questions till now?
Is it similar like Basque region that is existing in Spain, that Basque football club?
Um, can you elaborate what you mean specifically?
I think Basque Football Club is a club which only takes like players from Basque region only, right?
Yes.
Spain has
Mhm. Atletico
Spain has
Bilbao
rich.
is Atletico Bilbao is one of these clubs. So, for example, they play in the La Liga, the top football league in Spain, and they only recruit from people from the Basque region. So, you're absolutely right in that. That is also an incentive of the owners to, just establish their community further. Any other questions? Cool. We've answered that. The second thing is how do owners make money or how do teams make money in status quo? We've already talked about a couple of them.
I
Sponsors.
think sponsors, obviously, kid sponsors and official sponsors of the teams, ad revenues. Uh, Besides that, I don't think tickets are the direct source of income for teams.
No, tickets are a massive source of income for teams. Why not?
But that is for the league, right? I don't think that is for the team directly.
No, that depends on the league and the income distribution. So every league has a different rules on how much money you get to keep, and obviously once the league gets the money, it's distributed back to the owners. Again, dependent on the league. So owners do get money from ticket sales.
Of course, victories as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Srinivas?
Like a lot of owners of like different teams and clubs also go ahead and expand like the sporting group in general. So like probably Spurs has a brewery of their own. They partner with other leagues like NFL to provide their stadiums and things like that. So like a lot of partnerships that they get into.
Mm-hmm.
Not sponsorships necessarily, but partnerships.
Yeah, franchising. Makes sense. Anyone else? Cool. There are a few ways. One, ticket sales. Two, merchandise. For example, the kits you see, for example, the jerseys you buy from Team India, BCCI has direct benefit from that. Or any Manchester United jersey you buy, obviously a small cut of it will go back to the owners. Nike, Adidas will obviously take their part of the money, but it does trickle back to the club eventually. TV rights and broadcasting rights is something that's incredibly important. So you want to like channels or streaming services fight to be the only one who can go ahead and broadcast your particular sport. So, for example, in basketball, this looks like TNT and ESPN going ahead and fighting over rights or who can broadcast more games. Or similarly, every like you see Geo Hotstar hosting the IPL and not Netflix or Amazon Prime. Everyone fights for these like TV rights, and only a few select people are able to get it. And these are contracts which are incredibly high in value because you have like unique rights to broadcast these. So therefore, these are a massive source of income for leagues and for owners. It's also sponsorship and money from competitions. If you win, you're rewarded. So, for example, Premier League has a cash money prize for every single like ranking you finish in. Same thing with Champions League. These are ways in which your company can turn a profit. There are also other ways in terms of selling your players. So in football, if you sell players, you're able to generate a profit. If you sell more than you buy, you're able to get more money for your club and you're able to store that. That's a like strategy that a lot of smaller clubs use. I'll talk more about this later. But yes, coming back to original idea, owners can be good or bad. It's very important then for to see how owners are able to go ahead and increase the profit. Every like person wants to maximize the return on investment, but how they do that is very important. For example, like Gopal talks about, you make money through winning. Therefore, it is in your incentive to go ahead and produce the best team possible. So you could possibly invest in things like infrastructure, which will give you better academies and better players, which will allow you to like build better talent pool, which will may win the competition later. That's one way. Another way of going ahead and raising generating money is raising ticket prices and making it really expensive to go to the stadium. That point, every single ticket you make a lot more money and a lot more profit, but you're potentially isolating some set of fans who cannot afford these higher tickets. That would probably be called a bad owner. Therefore, it's very important to like understand there are different ways in which you can go ahead and generate money. It depends owner to owner on their risk appetite, on how fast they want the money, and on the basis of that, you could do things that are potentially beneficial for fans or potentially antagonistic to fans while trying to generate money. Are there any questions right now? Sure. So this is really important because you'll see a lot of debates with respect to commercialization in sports, where sports has recently become incredibly commercialized, which means you see a high number of sponsors and ads. Like kits are plastered with a lot of ads or like sponsorship logo these days, or you see that there's a heavy focus on selling merchandise. You This is the general commercialization of a lot of sports, and if you have to like oppose this, you can talk about how there are comparatives and how there are other ways to still generate income revenue while maintaining the quality of the game. So these offer you different ways of earning money without explicitly like without having to just struggle and say that this is the only way for you to generate money. Cool. Let's go to the next one. Yes. Teams. There are three kinds of teams: top tier teams, mid tier teams, bottom tier teams. My spelling is excellent over here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but what's important to note is again, they're not teams are not a monolith, which is to say, similarly to how we differentiated fans, and we said that some fans are hardcore and some fans are like just there to watch to kill time. it's very important to understand teams also have different incentives based on multiple things like their financial status. I'm going to quickly sort these through top tier teams, mid tier teams, and bottom tier teams. So, top tier teams are obviously those that are competing at the highest level, which are like most likely to win on championships or most likely very popular already because of the fact that they're so talented. This means that they're probably generating a lot of income and are trying to now maximize that by trying to, like sell, maybe become even more popular or try to like from the existing user base extract more amounts of money. So their incentives are one, staying as much like keeping the league as much as it is right now. They're more likely to be opposed to rule changes because that might hurt their team. Second, they want to grow and expand on their financials, but they have a sizable investment pool ready, which means they can already spend a lot of money on things like academies and player training because they already have a large financial capture already. Mid-tier teams can be of different kinds. They could be teams that are just come back from became were a bottom tier team and now have become a mid-tier team. They could be a top-tier team who has slipped into mid-tier. They could be a mid-tier team that has been mid-tier for a long time. They have a substantial following already, but are trapped in this where they're not explicitly good, but they're not explicitly bad either. These are the ones who are like more likely to be open to change and experiment because they have the money to go ahead and try out new things while simultaneously they're not good enough that they want to keep their existing formula. So these kind of teams are also very important. The third is the bottom tier teams. These are teams that could be in the threat of relegation if that exists in the league. They could be teams that are struggling financially. So this looks like brand new teams or like smaller size teams that exist within the Premier League, for example, who are at the bottom of the table. They're not doing too well financially, and at the same time, they're not doing well on like a standings level basis either. They have like their incentives are largely different. Why? If you have relegation, you probably don't want to get relegated because that means you're going to lose out on more money. If you're already struggling financially, most likely it is more important for you to go ahead and fix your financials than it is to like have talent, which is why you see a lot of struggling clubs will sell their best players because the money is more important for them than the amount of victories that that player could achieve. Therefore, it is not always in their incentive to grow and develop talent, but it might be in their incentive to go ahead and like create financial stability. If they're already financially stable and just suck, maybe their highest priority then becomes scouting talent. They don't mind being bad for 2 or 3 years because they're more focused on the long term vision and the long term future that they can generate. This is called rebuilding in the NBA, for example, where you're bad right now, but you collect potential pieces which could be very valuable, or players that could be with a high potential who will be like very good 4 to 5 years from now, even if not right now. So these teams also take a lot of risk, but they take it in a different manner, not a financial one. Any questions till now? Cool. Moving forward, the general public. Just one thing to note: health benefits. Gopal has already talked about this. This is an important stakeholder in the debate as well. Do not limit a debate to just fans or people who watch the sport actively. The mistake you can make is that often sports benefits extend not only to people who watch those sports, but people who play those sports, which are also sizable in number. You don't have to aggressively be a fan of Premier League football to go ahead and just play football in the evening with your friends. These people get trickle down effects. The more popular a sport is, the more likely they are to go ahead and participate in the sport, even if they don't follow it actively, because people around them talk about football, they're more likely to just play football. This is an excellent reason for explaining why, again, the government should go ahead and then invest in sports in the first place. There are a lot of public health benefits attached to sports, which you can access as the government by investing in sports. So you don't have to just do it again because stadiums are nice or economies are good, but also because it helps the general population, even people who don't watch sports directly, by giving them access to health benefits because of greater participations. I lost a debate like this at closing government where they just came and talked about health benefits, and the weighing is very important because this quantity of people is much larger And health benefits are incredibly important. You can characterize this by talking about how obesity rates are high, how people are more likely to stay indoors than they were 20, 30 years ago. All of these mean that it's incredibly important to access these health benefits, but also at the same time, there's a large multitude of people who are impacted by this much more than people who watch sports. What this relates to is that your argument will become much stronger than any narrow argument that only talks about why fans will be happier or sadder. Any questions till now? Moving forward. Cool. Players. What do players want? Why do people play why do people play sports? Or more importantly, if you're already playing a sport on a professional level, what is the most important thing for you?
So there are again many reasons, like why do players play sports? First of all, for their passion.
Mm-hmm.
Then, if they are playing at like international level for their countries, then like their patriotism, something like that, we can relate to it. And thirdly, yeah, if they win or even if they come like in top, so they would also get the money for that. So it is also one of the jobs, we can say. Being a player is also one of the job.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Anything else?
For money and fame.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, there are a few things. One, players want development, which is to say they want to maximize their own potential. If you think you're incredibly talented, you probably want to achieve the your potential and like maximize your output in terms of what your talent can be. For that, they want good infrastructure and they want good coaching. That is why you'll see a lot of players move to teams which are like well coached or you have good infrastructure because they believe they can maximize their talents in that manner. Of course, this is related to you in the end wanting money because the point at which you are more talented, you're likely to attract more money and more fame. But players are also focused on becoming better versions of themselves within the sports. The second is money. So money can originate through multiple manners. One is contracts, which is you sign with the team for X number of years in order to play for them, and you're paid accordingly. This depends on how talented you are and on how much the team needs you. That's one. Number two is sponsorships. This is incredibly important, right? Because the people don't only make money based on their contract, people also make a lot of money external from that because athletes are popular and therefore are likely to get a lot of sponsorships. The way then you go ahead and maximize your sponsorships as an individual is be more marketable, which is why you see these people very like regular on social media, are very active there, trying to grow and establish their brand. Number one. Number two, you will see actively these players trying to move into bigger markets because they promise more sponsorship opportunities. So, for example, in the NBA, people are more likely to go to teams that are situated in Los Angeles or New York because they know that the market there is much bigger and the sponsorship deals that they're going to get are much bigger than they can if they were in a smaller city with not as much of a basketball following. Therefore, people tend to prioritize going to more areas which are much more like historically popular because that's where they know they are going to go ahead and get like maximize their money outside of just contracts. Cool. The next thing is players want to avoid injuries. I think this is obvious, but this has an important play in terms of how you go ahead and negotiate contracts. Usually, players tend to be risk averse, which is to say they prioritize money right now as opposed to money later. The reason for this is that you can get injured and your career might end at any point of time. These sports are extremely risky, which means at any given day, out of sheer luck, it may be possible that you never be able to play the sport again, which means you're always scared that the day might come and you always prioritize money right now. This is incredibly important because when you're talking about players and how what the incentives of the actor are, it is important to note that these players are always going to prioritize money right now. If you promise them excellent contract in 5 years, if you take lesser money right now, that will not happen because they don't trust their own bodies to stay up for that long or any external circumstance to do this, much like like normal humans, but even more so because of their like the situation they're placed in, they're likely to prioritize money right now, and they're likely to care about their health right now much more than the future. Any questions?
So like they want to improve themselves to I didn't understand actually this avoid injuries point.
Sure, cool. Let's not talk about avoid injuries. Let's just talk about how injuries impact particular player psyche, right? There are multiple things here. First is the layer I talked about in terms of because you can get injured, and because if you're injured, you probably can't play that well, which means your next contract is going to be lower in value. It could also be your injury is so massive that you cannot play anymore and you're unlikely to get a future contract. Because of that, you prioritize getting the biggest contract possible for you right now, even if it comes at the potential trade off of money later. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So mainly for profit and money only.
Yes, but short-minded profit, which is to say, for example, a player was doing average right now, but they think they're really talented. They can take a cheap deal for a one-year contract and prove themselves, and then take a five-year contract, which is massive in money later on. Or they can take a three-year contract right now, which is like a moderate amount of money. Even though the maximum money you can get is on the first option where you take 1 year to prove yourself and then go ahead and opt into the large money, because the risk attached with injuries, with variations in performance, you're likely to prioritize the money you have right now and are more likely to opt into the 3 year contract. Does that make sense?
Mm, somewhat like I'm confused in this short term thing.
Um, sure, we can
Like
discuss this
3 years, 5 years.
later. Cool. Secondly, athletes' health is also something that's really important and been on the focus recently. This is also something you need to focus on. Athletes are really short termist about their health as well, which is to say, they are likely to damage their body in irreparable manners because of the sport they play right now, even at that cost, because it generates them money. Which is to say, you say in American football, a lot, for example, a lot of people who are now suffering through brain damage because they got so many concussions while they were playing the sport right now. MMA is an excellent example of this. So people tend to damage their bodies a lot, which happens within sports, but they are fine with taking on those short term injuries, or they are fine with that damage to their body, even if it hurts them over the long run, because of the fact that they're prioritizing maximizing their career and potential right now and the money that they can earn right now. Therefore, athletes are extremely short termist, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of their health. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any, anyone else? Any questions? Cool. Economy. This is an incredibly important part about sports and how it helps the economy. So, how do you think the local economy improves because of sports?
Multiple ways. First is, let's say you're hosting a tournament. Obviously, tourism is one of the things because it attracts tourism. Other things are, I think it is indirect marketing of the culture of your country, right? It looks like branding of your culture. This is some sort of indirect impact that is happening. Let's say India marketing its, let's say, handlooms or etc., which can probably get now more traction and more sell in the international market, which gets more traction, by the way. So this
Mhm.
is somehow marketing of your indigenous things. This
Excellent.
is one thing. Third
Anything?
is, I think companies get a lot of investment, right? The companies that, let's say, invest in these games do grow, right, when they get traction. I think this is more like your economy gets a lot of pump in of money because consumers see a lot of, no, I think audience sees a lot of the products that are being marketed. I think they then get consumed. This is like, let's say, pump in of money within the economy, which definitely helps like economy grow.
Yeah, sure. Excellent.
So,
Um,
like I have two more points to add. Like one, we can say if players would play and there are any competitions or something matches, so people would, the audience would always come to see. So from that, the fee which would be taken from them, a revenue would be generated for the economy to grow. And secondly, what I feel is that yeah, for the jerseys and all, the companies or the manufacturers which would be asked then, so like they're also they would also be profited, the manufacturers and all. And if they will get the money for manufacturing the equipments required and jerseys and all, so again growth of the economy.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Cool. Um, yeah, wait, one sec. Sukanya, you had also raised your hand. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I think we can divide it into two. One is short term, one is long term. On short term, adding on to the list, it can be infra and visibility in the sports arena. But on long term, about how you are boosting your youth and you are just providing them space and about the traction you get in that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Srinivas?
Yeah, I think mine was also on the idea that the more visibility that you get, especially for these smaller clubs, the higher the amount of like footfall that is going to happen in those places. Especially if you are in the big leagues during away days, you have a lot of traveling fans. So you have a lot more in terms of going ahead and improve boosting your economy by providing more accommodation to these people in lodging. And a lot of food places also get a lot of boost, right? Because you have your like food fairs that take place before games and things like that. So like just very minimal micro ways, which for the community in the long run becomes very important.
Yeah, excellent. I think focusing on the community is very important. And there are a lot of ways in which the local economy, which means people around the sports, even if not directly related, go ahead and benefit. What do these look like? Um, So, one, more infrastructure, which leads to more jobs. So, usually, when a stadium is funded, it is not completely paid for by the person owning the club. It is usually a mixture of private and public funding, which means the government invests some money. The owners usually go and appeal to the governments that, hey, I want to build a stadium and I need X $100 million, for example, and I will put in this much of my money, and together we can build the stadium, and it will be really beneficial to the economy of this area. A very shady practice, we don't need to talk about that, but usually what the idea I want you to understand is that these are built together. This is incredibly important for multiple reasons. One, this means you don't only improve stadiums, unlike the sport, you also try to improve the public infrastructure around the area. This means better accessibility to that stadium. So, for example, more metros or more buses running around that area, which means the area surrounding that stadium also becomes a lot more accessible and therefore a lot more popular, and more people go there and more people buy stuff. Or so this means, one, you expand on infrastructure, which makes it easier to live in those areas, which means you can now spread out much more or start up businesses in those areas. But second, it also means that you are able to create a lot of jobs building that infrastructure. So the stadium building and stuff obviously requires a lot of money, but also building the local infrastructure or the public infrastructure around it also helps in employment. That's number one. Number two, more job creation in the areas surrounding the stadium. For example, people who can sell T-shirts or people who can sell merchandise, knockoff merchandise often, near the stadiums, or people who can like for example sell banners and stuff where you can go ahead and support your team by displaying how passionate of a fan you are. You can sell all of these things. People who sell food at these stadiums, multiple vendors that necessarily exist, or for example supply and logistics that are necessarily needed. So you want to funnel in, like for example, if you want to keep your stadium clean, you will obviously need a lot of people who are necessarily like cleaning up the stadium. So in order to do that, you're now creating a lot of jobs, which means in the area surrounding these places, they also get a lot more popular and they also generate a lot of money. You can set up food stalls outside the stadium, you can set up restaurants, and you know people who are like tired and hungry after the match are going to go ahead and come fill your restaurants, which means you are able to generate a lot more income and revenue that way. Tourism is also something that's very important on a local level. This looks like, for example, if my town does not have a football match, but the neighboring town has a like football match that I want to go ahead and watch, I will drive up there. I will invest in their economy. I will invest in their businesses and allow them to increase their funding. So simply because of the fact that they have a football stadium and I don't, you're spending a lot of money in their petrol pumps, in their restaurants, because you have to travel there. So maybe if you're staying overnight, you're spending money in their hostel or in their hotels. All of this means the amount of foot traffic within these areas is increased, which means the amount of business you can create is increased. The last one is a lot more people playing football or like whatever sport that is expanding. This means that more academies, more talent development agencies exist. Coaches are able to generate a lot more money. More people can become coaches because that is now something, a career that can go ahead and get you a lot of money. Obviously, building these academies again leads to a lot of job creation. All of this means that just because people are interested in playing football, there are now a lot more jobs within the scope of football, which means a lot more people can get hired now for jobs that are beneficial for them, and even if you don't go into white collar jobs. Does this make sense? Any questions till now? I'm assuming none. Yes, Srinivas.
I just wanted to ask, like, this is probably a more community-centric benefit, but when a lot of these new owners like take over football clubs, a lot of social responsibility also gets set off against them, right? Like, for instance, when Rob McElhenney and like Ryan Reynolds bought Wrexham, a lot of social responsibility was set off against them, which means they did more charity drives like say during winters, and like a lot of clubs go ahead and donate foods to shelters and things like that. I don't think it boosts local economy in any way, but like is it just purely a community based benefit then?
Yeah, but you can also talk about how this boosts the economy. The point at which people are not starving and dying, you have more work, you have a bigger workforce that can enable you to do, like, achieve more things. So it's okay to talk about this on an economic level as well, but you're absolutely right. The point at which sports exist and these cultural communities exist, you're more likely to go ahead and offer welfare or charity to these communities. So often you see that players who join a particular community donate a lot to the causes surrounding that city because they care about that city and they want to establish their image within that city. How Srinivas talked about how new owners also do a lot of charity work in order to gain reputation, or even existing clubs do a lot of CSR and are, like, popular within their own community because they tend to donate a lot to their causes. So this looks like a relief against natural disaster. This looks like supporting low-income people and enabling them to play sports more. This looks like food banks. All of these things are also done by clubs, the point at which they intertwine with the community. Excellent point, Srinivas. Does anyone have anything to add? Yes, Sukunya.
Hi, so this is acknowledged, but the recent Olympics were held on foldable stadiums. If a team goes ahead and argues in favor of infrastructure, another team can go ahead and argue about tech and how tech promotes like these foldable stadiums, and the infra development still goes to like is not really developed. So, what should be the ideal reply in such technology cases?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that. What do you mean tech is developed and therefore?
Okay, no, no. So if one team argues that infra is being developed by these events, the other team goes ahead and says sure, but that infra comes when tech develops, and if tech has developed to an extent that it also has foldable stadiums, and every like all the resources that get into a truck and be transported or be stored at some location. So infra development does not really make out like, and it's something like a rebuttal or a counter prop mech which the opposition is doing. So how do we get ahead of this?
Not like, okay, what they're trying to argue is basically automation, right? Where jobs have become a lot more easier or a lot more of it is solved by existing technology. That is true, but that is mitigation at best, which is to say, you still need people who are going to install those foldable stadiums. You're still going to need people who create, like, who dig up the ground in order to go ahead and put the stadiums within them. You still need people who are going to go ahead and ensure the stadium is clean and watered every single day, which means job creation is still going to happen. It's not going to happen to the same extent where, like, tech did not exist, sure, but unless you've automated every single job, you still get a lot of infrastructure. Like, infrastructure development still leads to a lot of recruitment.
Oh, understood, understood. Got it.
Makes sense. Right. So again, sure, tech could make it so you need lesser workers, but you still need a lot of workers, like significant enough. So there are still economic benefits to talk about. Yes, Srinivas.
Like also when we go ahead and talk about like a boost to the local economy because you're providing more jobs to go ahead and build stadiums and things like that. The only like contrary example that I can think of in terms of how this probably harmed individuals was just like say just build like the people who built stadiums during the Qatar World Cup in the heat, right? Because a lot of them died. There were unaccounted deaths. There was a lack of accountability at large that was taken up by like bigger institutions and federations, right? How do you like kind of defend that? Because sure, that's only one piece of an example, but say probably in the scope of a debate that is more likely to be like viable because like the degree of harm was a lot more than the benefit that we're trying to probably generalize.
Mm-hmm. Sure. The way you want to go ahead and rebut this is these workers would have died regardless, which is to say, if Qatar did not spend that money on World Cup, they would have invested it into infrastructure of something else. The money is not just going to sit around. Maybe they build a brand new tower or a brand new city. Migrant laborers are still going to come. Migrant laborers are still going to work under harsh conditions. Migrant laborers are still going to die. The comparative is when the World Cup is there, you have 4 billion people watching you, which is a lot more than something that would happen for the development of the new city. So, sure, a lot of laborers died, but one, you were able to get visibility on those, which means you were able to generate some level of accountability, even if you didn't fix every single thing. But secondly, you were able to send a lot of relief and funds to these workers because you understood their plights. On the comparative, you would have never known anything was happening to them in the first place. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfectly. Yep.
Sure. There's also multiple ways to go ahead and rebut infrastructure as well. Not all infrastructure is good. Sometimes it's pointless. So, for example, in the 2014 Brazil World Cup, they created brand new stadiums which cost millions and millions of dollars, which are now unused. Like legit, nobody uses them except for the parking spots. Which means that a lot of land and the government money that was spent on this is not like being cycled back into the economy because nobody's using these stadiums anymore. So there is a wastage of money. If this had been invested in, say, things like a bridge, for example, which everyone uses every single day, that is a boost to the economy. But something that nobody uses was just a waste of money. So therefore, there are ways to counter this. It's not always that building of infrastructure is good, but on a general aspect, you can say infrastructure is a positive thing.
Got it.
Even Rio Olympics was a big loss to Brazil. Exactly. Um, cool. How does the international economy um, get better? So, what I want you to think of is like we talked about in terms of how local businesses get better because of sports. Think about it in terms of how does your area or your city become more prominent on an international scale and how that generates money because of sports. Anyone? Sure. There are multiple reasons why, and it's kind of complicated. One is international academies, which is if there are a lot of sports playing people in your city, it is also true that there are a lot more talented people in your city, which means that international countries or international clubs are likely setting up academies within your area to recruit these talented people. For example, Real Madrid will have a network all across the world to find talented players from every single corner and go try to bring them into Real Madrid. This means that other countries are setting up businesses within your economy, which means a lot of funds that would from like Real Madrid or economy or the Spanish economy are now being funneled into other poorer countries' economies because of these academies being created. Again, a lot more jobs created and all these things, which means you're able to increase the amount of money flowing in your like flowing within your economy because international money. Second, tourism. If places are really popular. So, for example, Camp Nou, which is Barcelona Stadium, is incredibly popular. Manchester United's stadium, Old Trafford, is incredibly popular. People like do tourism explicitly to go ahead and go to these stadiums or relive these memories of the matches that they've seen, which means you generate a lot of foreign income again because people travel to your stadium and pay money to see the stadium, pay money to go through the museums and like see all the all the like memorabilia around your or the trophies surrounding your stadium. All of this means you're able to generate a lot of money from the tourism from international visitors. Again, hotels, restaurants all get a lot more foot traffic. But also selling players, this is something we talked about in advance. A lot of poor countries tend to sell to more popular leagues or higher paying nations because they know that they can generate the maximum amount of funding from that. Because Real Madrid has so much money, they don't mind overpaying $5 million for a player because they really want that player that bad. At that point, you know your best source of income is these popular leagues, is these people who are willing to overpay a bit. So therefore, you're likely to sell to them and get all of that money funneling into your economy as opposed to the big leagues economy. All of this means you're able to generate a lot of money from international players just because you have sports. So like sports has a great return of investment not only among job creation among people within your community but also people outside your community now spending money on things inside your community and thus expanding the amount of capital you have. Any questions? Sure. The way I want you to think about this is again, it's very difficult to impact in sports as to why sports are a good thing and why sports need to be changed in a particular manner. You probably want to say if a sport does X, it becomes more popular or it becomes like more interesting. To that point, it then becomes it generates more tickets, more sales, more fans, which leads to greater revenue. This greater revenue is then invested back into the sport, which leads to the expansion of the economy within those areas. Here are all the reasons that we have already like why the economy expands, and you talk about everything we've done. Therefore, you prove that just because sport is getting better, people on the ground are feeling the benefits of the sport. It is very difficult to argue why competition is a good thing or why sports being entertaining is a good thing, but it's very intuitive for a judge to credit the argument that economy improving is a good thing. Therefore, showing tangible benefits on sports directly leads to showing tangible benefits on the economy, and this is the link you need to establish. This is how you want to strategically use this information. Making sense? Sure, let's move forward then. Cool. Sports itself is also a stakeholder. You want to talk about why the concept of sport is getting better. This can be done in multiple ways. One, for example, is competition. People usually prefer a highly competitive league, which is to say, for example, if all the teams are very close to each other, you probably find it much more entertaining or you find it much more interesting to go ahead and be an observer than if one team is winning every single time. Sure, that's not always the case. Sometimes dynasties are fun to watch because of how dominant they are. But the general idea is if the competition is equal, it is a much more unpredictable sport and therefore a much more interesting sport because you never know what will happen next, and that keeps you coming back again and again because you're able to generate so much drama, because you're able to generate so much like variability or chaos within your sport. Therefore, if competition increases in sports or like the differential between weak clubs and strong clubs grows smaller, it is usually a better thing for sports than the opposite. Am I making sense? Thumbs
Yep,
up?
yep.
Sure. The second thing is entertainment. It's also very important how entertaining the sport is. So, for example, in NBA, because of analytics, we found that taking a lot of three pointers is necessarily very beneficial to teams. What has happened is stylistically, all teams have changed to take a lot more three pointers, which means before teams used to have diverse identities in their style of play, but because analytics has shown that three pointers are uniquely the best singular objective way of winning, more teams are just taking three pointers as opposed to having unique styles of play. Because of this, a lot of people are complaining that the entertainment value of the NBA has gone down because there's not enough diversity in how different teams play and everyone's just shooting three pointers. That is one example. So certain rule changes might make a sport much more entertaining. Certain trends might make it less entertaining. We see something similar in football, where we have the concept of expected goals, which is if you shoot from a particular location, what is the probability you will score. So people have stopped taking more risky goals, which also tend to be more fancy goals, and started focusing on taking less risky goals because of the change in analytics. All of this means entertainment is something that is incredibly important to viewership, to the sport, to fans itself, but that might change because of certain trends that exist. Is this clear?
Yep, yep.
I will strategically use this in a debate is when talking about possible rule changes or possible changes to the sport, talk about how this is likely to increase competition. For example, if it is something that reduces the inequality between teams, then probably it would increase the competition. If that is true, the sport itself gets better. And if the sport itself gets better, you can talk about how fans are more likely to watch, how you get economic benefits, etc., etc. So sports itself is sometimes a very important stakeholder within the debate, and this is how you quantify how sport can get better. There are also obviously much more metrics that I haven't talked about, but these are some you can use. Cool. Then miscellaneous ones. Sports betting, sponsors, and boards. Sports betting has become insanely popular these days to the point it's most popular form of betting. Um, like it has dominated all aspects of sports in terms of sponsorships, in terms of how people approach the sport, in terms of what kind of advertisements you see or how people talk about sports in general. I won't talk a lot about it now. You can do this as homework, this research on the impact of sports betting. There are excellent videos by John Oliver, for example, on this. You can search them up on YouTube. Sponsors is something that's important. Sponsors are very selective about what kind of teams they're going to represent because the image of the team is going to be the image of the sponsors. Therefore, certain actions might make it much more lucrative for sponsors to go ahead and invest, or they might make it less lucrative for sponsors to go ahead and invest. I'll talk more about this in a sample motion. But thirdly is a board. A board is usually like a group of people who make the final decision. So the owner doesn't make all the decisions in a club. It's not left to one singular person. There's usually like a board of directors that come up to a final decision. They also have varying incentives in terms of what decisions to make for the club. Again, something you can research on your own. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Let's move forward. We have two motions that we're going to discuss. The first motion is this House would grant fans partial ownership of sports teams. Um, Take 30 seconds, after which I will ask you for the clashes within this motion. Don't give me arguments for and against, but try to think of it in terms of what are the most likely clashes that are going to happen. Cool. Does anyone want to go? Yes, Sukanya.
Alright, our first clash should be who are these fans we refer to, and what metric are these being differentiated on either side of the debate. And second, if fans are a clash, accessibility to those fans again becomes an issue.
Sure. That's excellent. First, we'll need to model this like debate in order to get any sort of clashes. So let's just assume that all fans have a vote and they get partial ownership. So they get like 25-30% of ownership of a club. And every single fan can vote on an issue and their votes will be like counted. So if 50% vote yes, 50% vote no. On the overall, this will be like a if they're 25% voting power, there'll be 12.5, 12.5, and it will depend on how the rest 75% vote. Does that make sense? Is the model clear?
Yep, yep, it is.
Sure. What clashes can we expect now? Try to think in terms of stakeholders, right? What stakeholders are impacted by this debate? Which ones did we talk about that are relevant over here? Yeah, Sukanya.
Okay, this is something like fans do not have that amount of like money on hand to just go ahead and buy. So the overall money in the league or in the clubs reduces. But on two, about amenities and ensuring the players get amenities and how do they work and function, that also like goes down to a larger extent if the fans are like not really understanding what these needs are. They simply vote it out. So the needs are not centered to sports people but the fans, which is problematic.
Sure. Um, yeah, excellent argument in terms of whether fans can buy that partial ownership in the first place. Let's assume that they can. Let's assume that the both. Sorry. Let's assume both. What is happening to my? Yeah, let's assume both clubs with partial ownership or without partial ownership have the same amount of money. What now? The rest of you can unmute or type in the chat as well. Sure. So, Sukanya, you were coming to the right clash. I think one of the important clashes in this debate is about money. How you think about money is whether people would want to invest in a team that has partial ownership of fans. Are they more likely to invest? Are they less likely to invest? I think that's an excellent clash. You wanted to say something?
Me? No, I got it.
Sure. So there are three generic clashes in this debate. Obviously, there can be more. The first one is in terms of who can govern the club better. And the way I want you to think about this is when you read this portion, the ownership of sports teams. So obviously, sports teams are an like important stakeholder in this debate. What do sports teams care about? Their success, their own management, whether they can become more successful or not. We talked about this in terms of top tier teams or mid tier teams and how they want to become more successful, right? So, who can govern the club better and make better decisions that are more likely for the club? Here, you can argue on both sides. For example, you can talk about when there's partial ownership in terms of fans, they are likely to make decisions that are better for the club. The reason for this is that other people who are making decisions, such as owners or board of directors, are usually very short termist or are very profit oriented, whereas fans are more likely to care about the legacy of the team. Fans are more likely to like care more about the players because of the emotional attachment they have to them, or what is best for the team on the long term because they're going to be fans for 20, 30 years. So they care more about that as opposed to generating short term money. Therefore, if you have fans, it is much more easier for you to then go ahead and then make better decisions because they are likely to care about the interests of the club as opposed to caring about money. Why do you think having fans would be a bad way to govern a club? Why could this potentially be negative? Anyone wants to try?
Can you come again? I just missed the last 10 seconds.
Why do you think fans might be bad decision makers when it comes to governing a club? Any
Okay,
guesses?
a step before. Okay, a step before this. What does governing, actually require? Is it just about yeah? Okay.
No, just decision making in general. For example, should we sell player X?
Oh, sure. So they have a hindsight bias about someone is their best player or someone was the reason they opted into the sport. So they do not want to sell it.
Hmm.
Something of that
And
sort.
why is that bad?
Moreover,
Some people.
being
Yeah.
1 second. Yeah. So, can you finish your thought?
I was saying they can just one be just retired at some point, but also do not bring as much amount of benefit they were at initial stages.
Hmm. Sure, Diksha.
being emotionally attached to the players, like they won't be able to take better decisions because yeah, again, being emotionally attached, they would think of like in the selling the players thing, they would think of selling one player and again the like the same point which Sukanya said about biasness.
Yeah, so I think you lose objectivity when it comes to your own team as a fan, and that is incredibly harmful because that means you take bad decisions. For example, if you're emotionally connected to a player, like you guys talk about, you're unlikely to sell them even if it is in the best interest of the team, which means on the long term, the team loses revenue, the team loses like potential wins it could have had if it had sold the player for a profit, but it can't anymore because you didn't objectively think about what's best for the team in the long term. You just thought about your emotions right now. People who are like the owners, the board of directors, are more likely to be objective because they don't have similar emotional attachments that fans do. Excellent argument. What else? Think about this in terms of finances, right? It's very important to financially keep a club alive in order to make it run successfully. Do you think fans are good at finances?
Not generally, like you cannot make it an obvious thing that they are good at it.
Mhm.
Uh, okay, but in hindsight, there can be also investors who are also fans and who want to, just take that fans. So, okay, this can happen. Partial ownership with fans. Fans are bought by big investors. So, on the pretext of this, investors are only putting in the money, but on the face of fans. So,
No, no, no. That's kind of against the spirit of the motion. The point is you want a democratic process with as many fans as
okay.
possible. But you're coming to the right idea, right? The people who are like the board of investors or the owners probably either have financial experts who are able to evaluate objectively what is the correct economic outcome of an like of a decision, or are like economically very experienced themselves in these kinds of things. Maybe because they own other clubs, because they have past experience. Random fans are unlikely to have the same economic insight. To that extent, they will make decisions that are bad for the economy of the club, which might lead to financial ruin, which might lead to the lack of a success of a club or the club shutting down altogether because they were not able to manage their finances properly because these people never understood. That's idea number two. Idea number three, not all fans are the same, which means you will have a lot of controversial and fractured opinions within the fans themselves. They themselves will not be able to decide what is the best thing and keep fighting within themselves more, like which will lead to chaos within the community, which will lead to chaos within the management of the team, as opposed to having a much more streamlined management when only few people are making the decision as opposed to thousands of people. All of these reasons are why fans are not good deciders of like what is the best for the club. So you can argue this on both sides. You can talk about how fans are extremely dedicated people who only want the best for the club and its outcome and are not motivated by money. On opposition, you can argue about how they don't have the experience or understanding or the ability to come to a consensus decision that will enable good management of the club. So that is one clash in this. The second is where would you get more money? So talk about sponsor incentives. What do you guys think are the incentives of sponsors or investors when looking at a club?
One can be owner expertise. So the owner does know into what they are investing in. So sponsors get it and they buy into that instinct of owners. But in fans, that instinct is missing.
Mhm. Yeah, so there are both sides to argue on this. So if you want to argue why you get more money, you can talk about when fans get to vote, they feel much more involved in the process, they feel more connected to the team, which means they become stronger fans, which means they invest more in the team. So you show up to more games or you like buy more of the merchandise because you love this team much more because you feel like you're actively a participant in the team. To that extent, you're able to generate a lot more revenue from the fans because they are become much more dedicated. At the same time, it's also the case that sponsors usually align themselves to companies that are better governed, which leads us to the first clash. If you can prove that because there's a lot of chaos that happens because of fans necessarily deciding being important factors in decision making, sponsors don't want to invest in such a company because they might make bad financial choices, which would mean like the sponsors do not get the return on investment, or it might mean that the club gets negative publicity because of a lot of fighting, which means that again the sponsors will not be able to get the return on investment. All of this means sponsors will be cautious of communities where fans are controlling the decision making within a club as opposed to owners, because they can be confident that owners will make the right financial choice, and this financial choice is likely to represent well for the sponsor. So therefore, sponsors might be less likely. So on Gov, you argue how more people spend more money. On Op, you argue how sponsors spend less money, and then you try to figure out which is much more impactful in the debate. But thirdly, is the fact where would fans enjoy themselves more? So this clash is in terms of where you feel much more committed as a fan. So, for example, on government, you'd argue that the point at which you are an active participant in what happens within the club, you feel much more connected, so you enjoy the games much more. Yeah, Sukanya, go ahead.
No, no, it is with respect to the previous clash. You can just conclude this for a moment.
Yeah, go on. Is there a specific question?
Yeah, I think on scale, I had a question that about fans buying more merchandise and being like involved, but on sponsorship. If we weight on scale, obviously sponsorship is like more weighted to the game as compared to just fans investing into and just coming to view the games. So on scale, how do we still take the win on the side of where the fans just get invested more?
That's not specifically true. Can you think of a scenario where you are more likely to earn income from fans than you are from sponsors?
Mm, that's what I am not able to think of. So on scale, I think since find sponsors being better off.
No, I'm saying it is possible to reverse it. Try to think. What could be a possible, which kind of clubs would be more dependent on fans for income than sponsors?
Are we talking mid tier and low tier ones?
Sorry?
Mid tier ones. Are we talking mid tier?
Not mid-tier, but yes, you're on the right track. Small scale clubs, right? For these people who are like, let's say, who have like 500 fans, for example, or are like a semi-professional club. These people are not going to get a lot of sponsors. Nobody's going to go to them that, hey, I want to invest money in you. These people are much more dependent on ticket generation. These people are much more dependent on the local community supporting them and pulling in resources to fund the club than they are on sponsorships because they're very limited in sponsorships. So it's untrue that sponsorship scale is something that's going to change. Like sponsorship is the most highly scalable impact within this metric. Ticket revenue and things are also important as well. So therefore,
Got
you can talk about this, but also you sponsors also have a tipping point. It is not like all sponsors will go away. The point at which there's partial ownership, it's just that some sponsors might be less likely to go ahead and invest in your club. So you have to like then compare the amount of money you're losing on that in terms of some sponsors going away, as opposed to fans being much more invested and how much money that's able to generate. It's also true that if fans are much more invested in the club, sponsors are also more likely to be attracted because they see a lot of high value customers. If you really care about the club, you will likely really care about the sponsors as well. So you're more likely to buy their merchandise when you see that they're dedicated fans and not just casual fans who just see the logo once or twice. So therefore, it is also true there's a sponsor incentive to go ahead and do it. The point at which um, clubs are also have ownership of their fans. So it really depends, and I think it's a clash that can be argued much deeper. Does that answer your question?
Yep, it does. Thank you.
Welcome. Does anyone else have any questions? Cool. Where would fans enjoy themselves? I'm just going to quickly talk about this. Very simply, again, when you feel much more part of a club, you're much more likely to enjoy it. That's true for hardcore fans, but that might not be true for random fans, right? We talked about casual viewers who are only likely to talk about things like who are only likely to watch the team once or twice and don't really care about participating within this like decision making system. The point at which it's true, it's also true that these like fans do not take care of the club well, you are likely to potentially isolate these kinds of people. Or even if you do take care of the club well, fans who vote are probably hardcore fans who care more about hardcore fans than they care about casual viewers. The point at which these people now get to make decisions, they will take decisions that favor hardcore fans but do not favor casual viewers, and casual viewers will feel much more isolated from these clubs than they did before. All of this means that you lose out on a lot of casual viewers, or they don't enjoy themselves while trying to support a team, even if hardcore fans are enjoying themselves more. That's also a clash within this debate, and you'll have to trade off which is more important. Cool. Any questions on this motion? I'm assuming none. The second motion is this house prefers a world in which all sports leagues adopted the relegation and promotion model over the franchise model. Take 30 seconds and then try to tell me what the clashes in this might be. Cool. Any guesses?
I couldn't actually understood the motion. Could you just brief once?
Yeah, this is a really tricky motion, right? Because there are a lot of sport-specific words which, like, a average person would not understand. So, a relegation promotion model exists in the Premier League, for example. So, in Premier League, what happens if you're one of the three worst teams, you get sent to the lower league at the end of the season, and in the lower league, the top three teams qualify for the Premier League, which means there is a rotation of three teams in the Premier League every year, where if you're performing really badly, you're sent to a lower league. And if you're performing really well in the lower league, you're sent to the Premier League. That is the relegation and promotion model. The franchise model, in comparison, is one where you're never changing, which is to say, in NBA, for example, there are 30 teams. No matter how well you perform or how badly you perform, you will always stay in the NBA. You cannot get shifted to a lower league or get promoted to an upper league based on your performance. Does that answer your question, Diksha?
Yes.
What do you guys think the potential clashes can be here?
For the better side, like if we are speaking in for the motion, here I would see that since you told that in franchisee their positions won't change, and in this one, yeah, they'll be assigned with lower or promoted positions. So this would be a much better option because you are being given what you deserve. You have played well, so you are deserving a promotion, right? And if you see the franchisee model, you see that you are being like compared same to all others, even if they have failed or they haven't played that well or they have lost. So that's one good point of this model.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. Meritocracy is something that's happened within sports, the point at which you have promotion relegation, which means smaller teams finally have a chance to get promoted to the big leagues where they would not have in a franchise model. That is true. But you do need to prove why meritocracy is something that's important in sports. You can talk about it in terms of the stakeholder we talked about in sports itself. When we said competition increases or entertainment increases, people are more likely to be entertained by something that has a meritocracy than something where everything is constant. We'll talk more about this clash later. But yeah, excellent idea. Anything else?
Yeah, for the betterment of the, for example, one, if the franchisee they know that they have not been, degraded to lower down, then they will not the motivation of performing better than their previous records. Now, on the other hand, if we have this relegation, they try to prove themselves again and again and have a good motivation and have a sort of going on a right track.
Excellent. Yes. So there are three broad clashes, and these are things we've already talked about. One, where do clubs make better decisions? So what, like for example, what Rosie talked about in terms of if you know that you cannot get relegated and you're going to stay in this league forever, you start asking yourself, like bad performing teams do not have a lot of incentives to perform well because they're going to be in the same position tomorrow, and because nothing is going to change, they're not going to get worse, and it's very difficult to get better, especially when you're bad. So there is no incentive for you to go ahead and then become better, and you just get stuck in mediocrity or being bad because of the inertia that necessarily exists. There's not a lot of incentive to go ahead and become better. But let's ask ourselves a question: if a team is getting relegated, why in a promotion relegation system, why would team make bad decisions?
Could you repeat the question, please?
If we had a promotion and a relegation model, would a team like give me one reason why teams would make bad decisions? What happens if you're a bad team in a promotion and relegation model? You get relegated, correct? This is important because the point at which in a franchise, you know you're not going to get relegated, you can make decisions that are impactful 3 to 5 years from now. You can make long term decisions which are important, which are good, which are going to be good and helpful for the club without worrying about how you're going to get demoted to the lower league. For example, if I want to build a brand new academy, but it's going to take 3 years, and I know that I am so bad I'm going to get relegated this year, I am unlikely to build that academy because in the lower leagues there is a lot less money than there is in the higher leagues, which means you become much more short termist in nature the second you decide that, like, the second relegation and promotion exists, because you know you're going to get relegated, and therefore taking any long term decisions would be harmful for your club because you don't know what position you're going to be in the long term. Comparatively, when you know you're going to be in the same position 5 years from now, you can take decisions that are going to be beneficial over the long term, over those 5 years, because you know you will be able to improve after those 5 years while still being in the same league and not have the harms of being in a lower league. Does this make sense?
Yeah, I have a question. Like you told earlier, like for the sports people, they have a very short vision. So is it allowed to have a long vision? Like after 5 years, we will be in the good position. Don't you think about a short term?
So again, we talked about this in terms of how owners can be good or owners can be bad, right? It really depends. So you have to show that there are some incentives of the owners to be long termist. For example, if I buy a club for billions of dollars, I'm probably not going to sell it in 2 3 years. I'm going to hold on to it for a long time and then I'm going to sell it. Which means in the middle, if I want to make a profit, I will need to have some decisions that will enable me to make big profits over 5 10 years. If I'm going to sell in 20 years, I still need to make profit in 10 years. So therefore you will have to make long term decisions. So therefore it is important. Sure, they're relatively short termist in nature, but there are some incentives to still perform over the long term. Does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Sure. What do you guys think then? Like, where are clubs financially better off? That is the second clash. What do you guys think?
In the franchising?
Why do you think so? Why do you think they're much more like financially better off in franchising?
Because of the stability that they are providing for a
Hmm.
long term, they have a vision, so more sponsorship, whatever, because they know they'll be stable. They won't be, left out or would go in degrade and they will be dissolved.
Excellent, excellent. When we're talking about where teams are financially better off, the stakeholders you need to think back to are sponsors. How are these teams going to get investments? Rosie's idea is excellent here because the point at which you know you're going to be in the same league for 5 years and you have that stability, sponsors really care about that. If sponsors are scared you'll get relegated, they're unlikely to represent your team because of the financial volatility you have moving between leagues. You get paid much more in the big leagues, you get paid much lesser in the smaller leagues. Or like, more people watch you in the big leagues, lesser people watch you in the lower leagues. This means that sponsors are very scared of where you'll end up in a few years and are unlikely to represent you to that extent. Therefore, franchisees might be better. But can you think of a reason why other like the opposite is true, and why a relegation and promotion system might be make clubs financially better off?
Then it could be the flexibility for the vertical responses, because if they know that this team is performing better in this one, then they can invest more in them. And if that team is degrading, so they can take out the sponsors that they have given.
Mhm. Sure, that's a good idea about how investors might look at this as a asset that could potentially get much better in the future. Excellent idea. Anything else? I think it's also the case that when you are a brand new team, you have much more eyes on you and you're much more popular. Which is to say, you get a lot more media attention when you've just been promoted. For example, if you were a team in a franchise model that is sucked for 5 years, nobody is going to look at you or care about you, and you will not have a lot of media visibility, or you will not have a lot of like positive financials, or like people coming to visit your stadiums or watch your games. Comparatively, if you just got promoted, even if you're terrible according to the top league standards, you are still something that's new. You are still something that's exciting, which means people might try to come to see how you perform and figure out if you're really good or not. People are still interested in you because they don't believe that you're completely bad and you're going to be bad for the next 5 years. Because people think you have a lot of potential because you're an up and coming team. All of this means that there is a lot of popularity and media attention that goes to these clubs when they are at promotion or when they are at relegation. This means more interest from people, which means much more money generated as revenue from these people. Does that make sense?
Yes, but isn't the case could be reversed? Like for example, if you are newbie, so you won't have that much like sponsorship promotion because you are very new, so they don't have the trust in you.
Yes, that is true. But at the same time, what I'm trying to say is that media gives you a lot of attention because you are an up and coming team who recently won the lower league. You are a brand new team who has never played in this league before or for a very long time. That media attention translates to sponsors being interested because you're popular, or fans being more interested to see your games because you have high potential. All of this means that you're able to generate a lot more money than comparatively to a team that has been on the same level for 5 years. Sure, let's move to the third clash. Where is fan engagement better? Where do you think fans enjoy themselves more? What do you
In the
think is
former one, as in the motion given, if we go for like if you go in the four, so it would be better, like fans would enjoy, because if your team is being promoted and you are a big fan of that, then you'll also enjoy with the promotion of that team. And yeah, like being emotionally attached, the fans would also feel sad about when their team would be demoted. But then again, like the team would improve and the fans would also be encouraged, and they would also motivate their teams to work better. So this would be a better model in that way.
makes sense? Anything else? Any other ideas? Think about in terms of sports itself. How do we think of things as entertaining? So the way you want to think about this is when you have promotion and relegation, matches become much more exciting. For example, if a team is 1 point away from relegation, they're probably fighting for their life and playing very hard in order to in order to survive and stay in the league. Which means players give much more of an effort. Which means fans are much more engrossed within the game. The drama is higher. All of this means there's a lot more interest generated on these games. These games tend to be more exciting. Every goal is worth a lot more when it changes the fact whether you survive in the league or not. Similarly, for promotion, if you're just 1 point away from promotion, you really want to win that game. Your fans are really cheering for you, which means the existing fans find the game much more interesting because there's a lot more drama and a lot more entertainment, and every game is much more meaningful than the game in terms of franchise model. In franchise model, even if you lose every game, you're still going to stay there. So you're not as invested in the wins or loss of your team as you would be if it changes your entire situation. This is why it might be interesting in like more engaging within the promotion and relegation system. Why it will be more engaging in the franchise system is because if your team gets relegated, for example, you probably stop enjoying the sport. You don't want to watch your team in a lower league. You only supported them because they were in the top league. So for a lot of fans, they're unlikely to watch the teams in the lower leagues. So they have two options: either A, start supporting another team, or start this thing, like, or stop watching the sport completely. It's really difficult to support another team when you were already supporting a team for so long. One, but two, if multiple teams keep getting relegated, it's really exhausting for you to keep switching teams because you feel like you can't find that one team you're always passionate about. This means that it's very tiring to go ahead and support another team, or you don't feel the same emotions on, and therefore you stop watching the sport altogether, or you never want to choose another team, so therefore you just don't engage with the sports. On a comparative, if you really love your team and you know they're not going to get demoted, you will continue to love them. If you love something for 5 years, it's much more likely you're going to love it in the sixth year as opposed to something that has relegated and you have to find a brand new club. Therefore, fan engagement is higher because it's much more consistent, and fans enjoy that consistency of seeing their team in the top league every single year. Comparatively, even though it's true that promoting clubs will now get a lot more fans than before, it's also true that the relegated clubs will lose a lot more fans. And since the relegated clubs had an established fan base, the amount of fans they will lose is much more than the number of fans a newly promoted club will gain because it doesn't have that same level of establishment that already did. So it needs to work a lot more and establish a lot more cultural ties with the community, establish a lot more, historic moments before it can get the same level of fans as someone who had already been there for a long time. Because of this, fan engagement is better when you are much more consistent and predictable. Does that make sense to you all? Cool. Any questions? Anything to add? We're at the end of the session. All right. Thank you so much for listening in. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.